All right, welcome to the show. You're listening to Being Built. I'm the founder of Reckless Tech, Aaron Davis. I'm the host. I'm here with Tim Metzner, founder of Fireroad.
That's right.
And I'm curious to learn all about Fireroad.
Yeah, let's go.
Okay, cool. You want to start from the top? What gave you the idea to start it?
Oh, man. Let's see. Fireroad's like this long vision I've had. Like, I really feel like it's kind of like the culmination of stuff I've done throughout my career, like going back even to college. So I was at the University of Cincinnati, and I was in this like awesome 5-year scholarship program, but it was really like built for the future corporate leaders of Cincinnati. So it was literally like Procter and Gamble and, Kroger and these amazing companies got together and said, like, this was like late 90s. They're like, man, we have this problem of all the smartest people are leaving Cincinnati for college and beyond, and we have a hard time getting them back. And we've got all these great Fortune 500s in town. So they started this awesome program called Linner Honors Plus. Carl Linner was a huge founding partner of that. And it's a 5-year scholarship program. But the coolest thing about it for me was, well, two things really. One was co-op. So it's a 5-year program, but every other quarter you're working for that 5 years.
Yeah, so you're actually getting real education on top of theoretical education.
Experience. And like for me, there's a ton of learning in there, but also you learn what you don't want to do. Like there's a whole lot of people who spend 4 years getting a degree only to graduate, get their first job and go like, oh crap, I don't really enjoy this, right? And so to have that right away after freshman year, you're like thrown into the workforce. So amazing program. And most of my colleagues, as we started co-oping, went to Kroger and Fifth Third and these amazing organizations. And I met this entrepreneur who had left a job at P&G in the late 90s, started a tech company called Up for Sale and sold it to eBay. So I met this guy in early 2000. He had sold his first company to eBay in a pre-IPO acquisition. And he was like flying back and forth from, the Valley to Cincinnati doing his earnout and starting company number 2 on the side with some of his own capital. And he hired me as a co-op. And so
nice.
I was like, man, I'm all in. I tell people all the time, it's the best opportunity, and also it was ruined because I could never get a normal job after that being my first experience. Like, and I had all these.
Did you ever go work corporate work?
I've never had a quote unquote real job. Like,
wow. Okay.
I think, I like any job I've had. So when I graduated college, I went to work for that startup full time. So that would be my only job, was an early employee at that company, which I started as a co-op, like employee number 5 as a co-op at a startup. Ever since then, it's been, I've created my own companies, so created my own jobs, like literally ever since. So, but that was an incredible experience. Like, and I think in hindsight, as I look back, like what made it even more powerful is I had all these amazing, smart classmates who were working at all these awesome companies. And so I got to hear their experience and compare it to what I was doing. And like the amount of responsibility that was put on my shoulders as a, early 19, 20 something, like was just insane compared to like making coffees and, building some Excel models and stuff like that a lot of other people were doing. I'm like, man, I'm a part of this small team who's running after this like really big vision to change the world. And we were like, wanted to build this online platform to help people achieve their goals. So we're building this direct to consumer thing. I'm like, I'm part of a small team. I have a crazy responsibility. We're building this cool for-profit company, but it's very mission based. And I was just like, man, I was all in on that. Like, it was just such a cool experience. But fully transparent, like in, 99, 2000, as I was finishing high school, like I wanted to leave Cincinnati. I was like, I'm getting out of this town. Like I don't hate Cincinnati, but there's a big world out there, right? And like had some opportunities to play basketball, really wanted to do that, but no scholarship offers. And then I got a full ride, and I'm first generation college student. So like family's all blue collar, amazing, awesome, great West Side Cincinnati family, but all blue collar. And so I'm first generation college. My parents didn't have a ton of money, and I get a full ride academic scholarship for the University of Cincinnati. I'm like, I think I'm staying in Cincinnati.
Yeah.
But like that did create this sort of itch to go experience something else. So other than that startup, the only other co-op I did was I found my way into a co-op out on the West Coast. So I found a job in San Francisco with a private equity firm, just like worked my network aggressively, ended up, one of the guys I was working with at Spark People knew the founder of a private equity firm out on the West Coast. And so I got a chance to go live in San Francisco for 6 months in the early 2000s and work in private equity. And I remember like distinctly, I had no experience to startups or, anything before college. And I had no idea what entrepreneurship was. And I certainly didn't know what private equity was. So I'm like, like any good person, good employee, like trying to learn the model, like learn this category as I'm preparing to go out there. And I'm like, so you get a bunch of money from other people to buy already good businesses. you scale those businesses and you keep a bunch of the money that you make like as you're scaling. Like that doesn't even like, how does that work? Like, how's that a thing? So sort of like, if that's real, someday I want to get back to that because that feels like that could be really
lucrative.
fun, right? Like it's a great career. So that's sort of filed in the back of my mind. And it was a really cool experience because I was in San Francisco in the early 2000s. And obviously I was not working in venture, but I had the startup experience. So I was aware of venture and sort of the amazing just ecosystem that was already out there in San Francisco. So to get to see sort of the private capital market side of the business and have this real world kind of startup experience all before I even graduated college was, in hindsight, I look back at that like, man, what a cool experience that was.
Yeah, forget the MBA.
Formative.
I'd trade you in a
Exactly.
heartbeat.
That's exactly right. So, and that's why, as I graduated, I started to think like, okay, do I really stay with this startup or do I go into like, management consulting or something like that and like really get trained? And I just couldn't shake the fact that like the amount of stuff I got to do at that point already was insane. And I'm like, I should probably keep going on this ride. And especially because I would say today, the way I described it is like at some point in college, there was like this seed planted by God that was like, you should be an entrepreneur. It's like, I say that because I'm like, I didn't grow up around it. I didn't know anyone who was an entrepreneur. I probably couldn't even told you what it was. There were no like entrepreneurship programs in school when I was there. It was just business program. And so, but for whatever reason, I'm like, I think I want to start a company someday. And so that's what led me to taking that first job. And I felt like, well, if I'm going to do that, like I should really learn as much as I possibly can about this journey. So I had a great time at Spark People for 5 or 6 years. Towards the end of my time there full time, I had this realization of just the lack of a startup community in Cincinnati. So like what really hit me was there were a couple people I would hang out with every once in a while who were doing stuff, but just not that many. I don't think I noticed the outage until I went to a startup weekend event in Columbus. A buddy just said, hey, there's this thing, you should come hang out. You'll have a blast. You love this stuff. So I went up to Columbus. I'm like, holy cow, like there's investors, there's entrepreneurs, there's all these folks from the ecosystem getting together and helping each other and just getting to know each other and building community. And I'm like, man, where's this at in Cincinnati? Mm-hmm. And so I came back from that and said like, we really need startup weekend. And we need a community. Like, let's do that. So helped organize the first startup weekend event. I worked with Dave Knox, who was the founder of the Brandery, one of the first accelerators in Cincinnati. And then there was an entrepreneurship professor named Rodney D'Souza. He was at Northern Kentucky. 3 of us and some other folks just got together and said, like, let's make this happen. So we brought Startup Weekend to Cincinnati.
Is it still going?
We haven't had an event in a long time, but it was up until COVID. I think actually COVID I don't think we've had one since COVID, but it had kind of slowed down. And, in hindsight, what happened was there was a handful of us early on who were spending a lot of time doing the like community ecosystem building, like organizing events, mentoring, guiding. Just, I started an accelerator myself called Ocean. So like there was a handful of us like creating a whole lot of activity. And it kind of got to the point where, Centrifuge had started. There's this like kind of this quasi-governmental entity that's like founded by some company money and some state dollars. And like basically like, let's stir the pot and create more activity in Cincinnati. We're like, awesome. I'd love for that to be someone's job because, I've got kids and a startup of my own. Like I'm trying to do a whole lot here. And I think the other realization, at least for myself and Rye Walker, who is my partner at Differential, was like,
he's going to be a guest next week.
You're going to have him on. Great.
Yeah, we had to reschedule him, but he's coming in next week.
Yeah. So I think we both sort of had this realization of one of the biggest gaps Cincinnati still had was just great startups. And we're like, man, we got to be a part of it. Like, we could spend all day ecosystem.
There's a ton of them, though. There's a ton of great startups coming out of Cincinnati. And maybe you had something to do with that.
There weren't at the time. I think that was still like, there was a bunch of nascent stuff that was like really early. But like, if you look at any great startup ecosystem, the thing they can all point to is a big exit or multiple big exits.
Right, true.
Like, especially in the Midwest, like in the Valley, obviously there's untold number of those, right? But if you look at like a region like Indianapolis, you have, a bunch of folks who made a bunch of money on an exact target exit to Salesforce. And it was a massive exit, right? And the same thing happened in Columbus. You have a couple pretty large exits. And what happens is like the capital gets recycled. And even more importantly,
the brain power stays there.
That's right. You've got a bunch of people who've been had a front row seat to building a startup, this hyper growth, which is unlike any other experience you can have. And so you've got people who are now like either starting their second company or jumping out of a early employee seat and becoming founders on their own. And you've got a bunch of new angel investors who made their money in a startup world because they literally just got rich
like,
on
wait,
their own
this
startup.
is how this
right?
is the kind of return I can get. Yeah,
So
let's
now
find
they
another.
want to be investors, right? So you've got that, you need that flywheel. And we were like, man, we just looked around Cincinnati. We're like, there's some early bubblings of stuff that's awesome. We want community to happen. But we're sort of like, we don't know it all, but we've got as much experience as anyone in town in this world. Like, we need to create some great companies. And, Rye went all in on Astronomer, which we spun out of Differential. And I helped stand up a service company within Differential. And we've skipped some of the steps in the journey here. But I stepped out of that after standing up a service company and said, like, I want to take a big swing. I want to build one of those companies. And that's what led me to co-founding Coterie. Yep. So that was, 6 years ago or so. I just had sort of circled insurance and healthcare as two categories that I felt like I knew enough about to be dangerous. I believed Cincinnati had a right to win in those categories if you build a tech-first organization. And I said, like, if I could pair up with a domain expert who had a vision for solving problems in one of those spaces, I think it'd be really powerful. And, as luck would have it, I met David McFarland, who's our CEO at Coterie, and he had moved to Cincinnati literally wanting to start this company. And someone pointed in my direction, and just hanging out, having coffee, like, give me feedback on the pitch deck and help introduce me to folks in town. And I remember, like, texting my wife after that, like, and David and I didn't even talk about working together, but I texted my wife. I'm like, I think I found the next thing I want to do.
Really?
Like, this insurance, like, he's an actuary, he's a domain expert. He's like literally one of the smartest guys I've spent time with. And now, having worked with him, like, one of the smartest dudes I've ever worked with. So, like, he's the kind of guy I know I can come alongside and do something special with. And so I had this vision for what is now Fireroad. Like, I had the bubblings of it 6 years ago when I was thinking about jumping into Coterie. And I almost ran after it, but I was like, man, I really think we need some great companies. I think this one could be. I really think this is a special opportunity with a team that could do something really interesting.
You think meeting the right person helped get you the rest of the, like, what percentage of the way there were you before you met the right person to help kind of steer it with you?
That's a great question, because, I literally had a spreadsheet of ideas, and it was like a couple of them were like real, like people I'd talked to, like, here's a thing you could do. And a couple of them were more like what would become Fireroad, was sort of this concept, right? And, one of the ideas, the concepts was like start an insurance or a healthcare company, like, but build it with a tech data first mentality. And so to meet someone who literally wanted to do that here in Cincinnati, who had this incredible domain expertise, and not only had he been an actuary his entire career, he actually, before Coterie, had startup experience. He had left his, like, corporate actuary job, like, against all great advice of people around him, making great money as an actuary, like, climbing the ladder, like, had the ear of the board as a young guy, like, and he left to go to Chicago to help start an insure tech there. And so he did that because he knew eventually he wanted to start Coterie.
Interesting.
And so he went and got this awesome startup experience as, like, employee number 3, like, basically co-founder. He wasn't co-founder title, but he was the founding actuary and basically the insurance guy on the startup team.
The SME.
Yep, exactly. So he did that for a handful of years, and then after that said, like, all right, it's time to run after this vision I've had for reinventing small commercial insurance. And that's when I met him, which was it was just a pitch deck at the time, but like, his level of intelligence is such that, like, after meeting him, I'm like, I think this is amazing, and he could be totally full of shit. I don't know. Right. And so, like, as I was
at least good enough to know you. Right?
So what I did was like, well, I've got a couple other people who I like, some of the other smartest people I know. I'm like, I want you to go meet with this guy and tell me what you think. And both of them, I'm like, basically asked them, what do you see as, like, the biggest risk here? And the answer was like, what's a startup? I'm like, that doesn't scare me one bit. Like, that's not, like, I'm very comfortable with that risk, but, like, do you think there's a there? It feels like there is to me, but, like, this one of the guys I sent to meet him was another actuary at Great American at, like, one of the highest levels there. And so I'm like, if you can't, if you can't see through this, then I feel pretty good about it. And he's like, no, it's like, it makes perfect sense, the model that he wants to run after. And so, yeah, I think to answer your question, I think meeting David at that time was a huge part of it. It was like, it pretty quickly became obvious, like, it's too good of an opportunity not to run after this. And so, yeah, we spent a bunch of time together in early meetings, and I think he realized pretty quickly I was a good complement to the skill set he had. And he's an amazing dude. He's an actuary, and, he thinks very logically, and I'm very emotional and I'm high on empathy. And, like, I talk a lot about people and teams and culture, and, And he's like, I understand the value of that. I don't really know how to do that. I want you to own it. And I'm like, great. That's right in my wheelhouse, man. I'm happy to step in and do that. So I think that the complementary skill sets, it was already in a space I was interested in. And I felt like, it sounds crazy and brazen, but that's how much like, I thought we could build the next great American insurance, like in Cincinnati. Like, why not?
How's it doing now?
Amazing. So the company's in a great spot. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my career anyways. And insurance is highly regulated, and it's regulated on a state-by-state basis. And it's not just 50, it's 51 because DC acts separate. So you deal with 51 insurance regulators that you have to get approvals on. And not just up front, like anytime you want to change something, like you have to refile. Like it is an intense process that requires like a ton of time and energy and expertise, even just to get approved to sell insurance in a state if you're going to build an insurance product from the ground up. And so that's a massive moat that we're able to create. And that's just like one level of complexity. Then you think about like there's, 25 different 100 classes of small business. When you think about like NAICS code and all these different classes, like in each one of those,
differentiate product for all of them.
That's right. Each one of those acts a little bit differently. The policy, like when you think about like the full, like what's the actual product? It's a policy document is sort of the output, right? Like you're insuring a company, but what they get is a document. Well, that document requires a ton of complexity just to create it, right? Like based on what industry in, what state they're in, how large they are. Like there's so much that goes into doing that, like on the output, but even on the input side of like, how are you going to underwrite this thing? And our vision was like, we actually think we can underwrite better than the norm and faster and cheaper than what everyone else is doing by leveraging data and technology. So that's exactly what we did. Like I said, it was a massive hill to climb to get to market, not just from the regulatory, but we also had this kind of two-headed product beast. Like you're not just building a technology product and experience, like you have to build insurance products, and those two have to marry at the same time. That's really, really challenging when you're trying to move quick and in a space that doesn't move quick. And so, but we got to this point where like, man, all we need is business name and address, and we can fully underwrite, price, and bind policy. And that was just like game changer to the industry once we figured out sort of distribution, which that was its own challenge.
You mentioned the moat, and the barrier to entry there is obviously huge given the regulatory standards in that industry and a few others. But do you think, so that's the barrier to entry for other startups, right? But why aren't the big players doing what you guys did at Coterie?
Yeah, at first
I'm going to come back to the conversation about Fireroad, by the way.
Yeah, sure. No, I know.
It's a winding because I am curious about Coterie too.
Yeah, so my first thesis, the reason I wanted to get into insurance is at Differential, we had started to do some innovation work, and a couple of the projects we did was around insurance. And I remember distinctly a couple of projects we spent time on where it was like, this is so damn obvious. Like, you should absolutely run after this. And, we basically took them through a design sprint, like, uncovered a problem, like scoped out a solution, validated it, and then, they turned it into a pitch deck that they sort of toured around and showed everyone the cool stuff they did, but like it was never greenlit. And that happened like time and time again. I'm like, man, these guys are just like, it's like the too big to fail, the innovator's dilemma is real. And I started to like realize there were sort of two different types of people. They're either really senior and old enough, they're like, I understand technology is going to change the way this category works, but not on my watch. Like I don't want to deal with it, right? I can see my glide path to retirement, like I'm cool. Or you've got like the really young scrappy innovators, and it's like career suicide if it doesn't work. And like to get the buy-in and approval is intense, and like you're fighting an uphill battle, and like a lot of those folks
build the rocket or take the next step on the ladder.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like either get in line or you're gonna have to go somewhere else to be really innovative. And I'm like, man, I saw that enough times where I'm like, poof, there's an opportunity. So I thought that was, they just couldn't get out of their own way. I think that's part of it. But what we started to realize a couple years in was like, it's actually fundamentally against their business model. Like when you get to become a large insurance company, you basically just have an annuity. Like almost all of your business is on renewals. You're just checking about like a tiny sliver of your business is new business. Everything we did was focused on new business. Like we're going to be really innovative about how we get a policy in the door. And like, we don't really care about new business. I mean, that's not fully true, but when 90% or whatever of your book is just renewals and all you have to do is not lose that policy, it doesn't make sense to spend a whole lot of time on this new
Innovating.
model for how you, right? So
right.
it's like really all they want to do is just keep you around as a policyholder and they win. So it sort
Makes
of works
sense.
against them to try and do all this innovation when like really all I got to do is keep my people happy who are selling for me.
Interesting.
And they're scared to death of like creating channel conflict. Like if there's any perception in the, independent agent world or in the agent world in general that you're trying to do an end around, like they're like, oh, well, I'll take my business to some other insurance company that's not going to innovate. So they had this sort of channel conflict issue, and they had, innovator's dilemma, and all that is real. And part of it was just like, there's not a whole lot of motivation to change.
Yeah. Props to you for getting into something really hard. That's intimidating when I think about it. There's almost no startup industry I wouldn't prefer to get into just because of the simplicity of it. But you went intentionally into the hard thing.
Yeah.
Where there's a lot of barriers for the big guys and there's a lot of barriers for the small guys to get started, and kind of pushed your way through those few years getting it going. So congrats to you on that.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's not a small thing.
No. And, it's, I guess I'm a glutton for punishment because I keep jumping in and restarting. And Coterie, so how's Coterie doing? We're great. Like we're growing like crazy. We sort of realize like we're solving this great problem for independent agents who, what we realized, like, so I went out and just interviewed like 100 agents in a couple weeks. Like I just got to learn more about this space. Well, first I studied to become a licensed insurance agent. So that was like first how I learned the category.
Yeah.
Like that was kind of a crazy journey. But then once we started thinking about the agent channel, like, which is sort of the normal channel in insurance, I'm like, well, I just need to talk to a bunch of folks. And after those 100, phone conversations or videos, it was like a common thread I kept hearing was most of the people I was talking to anyway make most of their money on selling your home and auto. Like that's their bread and butter. Okay. What happens is you start to build your book though over time is like inevitably some of those home and auto owners are business owners. And so they come to you and they say like, hey, will you help me write my small business policy as well? And if you say no, I'm going to go find someone else who will. Yeah. And when I do,
get strung along,
that person's bringing my home and auto with, they want everything. And you want it all in one place. So you don't have to think about it. It's not like no one wakes up excited to shop for insurance on a Saturday.
It's not a problem I need to solve.
Yeah. You get it done.
The only problem about my insurance is that I have to write 2 checks or 3 or 1.
That's right.
That's it.
Yeah. So that independent agent's like, well, I have to do I got to figure out a small commercial solution. Like, even though it's going to take me forever to write it, like it's a pain in the butt. It's a really small policy. Usually I don't make much money on it. So it's like, it's not that sexy or attractive to them, but they sort of got to do it. So they're like, all right, well, if there's a better way to do it, that'd be awesome. So we put a solution for them. We're like, just enter a business name and address and stop filling out that 20-page application with mostly irrelevant questions that you spend all this time on.
Nice.
And we'll tell you right away, like, is it in appetite or not? And if it is, all we need is credit card. That's
so you
it.
really
You're
simplified the channel partner experience, and that's how you
significantly.
That's awesome. Yeah. So one of the questions that came to mind as you were talking about that and the difficulty of starting a business like that is, how long was your vision? There aren't a lot of leaders, particularly tech leaders, who are thinking 6 years out. Did you realize it was going to take that long to get to this point where you could then, focus on something else?
Yeah, that's a good question. I didn't step in with the intention of like stepping out. I haven't in any of the businesses, though I've, my my dad would tell you I fired myself from my own company on multiple occasions, like right when it started to get good. But it was never like my intention to, remove myself from that. But with Coterie, it was really like, actually one of the reasons I said yes was when I had the conversation with David and then Kevin Mackey, who's our third co-founder, like, I think we should build like an enduring business. Like, let's build, like, not build for exit. Like, we've all independently sort of had enough experience now and had a few swings. Like, I'm not saying we're not going to raise venture, but let's not build with a quick flip in mind. Like, let's try and build an amazing company that could stick around. Mm-hmm. And if we want to think about an exit, like, let's think about an IPO, not a quick sale to Great American or whoever, right?
It could be a great Cincinnati employer for some years to come, right?
Exactly. Like, I think a lot about, like, and this is a big motivation for Fireroad, like, I love creating jobs. There's a big motivation for stepping out of the service company we would build at Differential. Was like, we had 25 jobs and they were awesome and people loved them and I loved the work we were doing. But like, I started to have this realization of like, man, we had mostly engineers at Differential. We were like 6 or 7 years in. A handful of those folks are on the West Coast. We were a service company at that point. Like, we had spun out Astronomer. We weren't doing any more startup stuff. It was literally like we're a service, we're
Building
a dev
customers.
shop kind of, right? Like, and we're doing stuff that was really cool and innovative. And like, I don't know, like, I know we're not paying anywhere near, Valley salaries to these engineers. I know they're getting job offers all the time. I was like, why? Like, what's keeping them around? And like, as you lean into it, it's like, well, they love their job. They believe their employer actually cares about them, because we do things like a monthly one-on-one where we just talk about you and your career and your personal life and where you want to go. And like, we've done that forever. And we bring people together multiple times a year, and we talk about how do we make this culture better. And like, there was this belief that like you really wanted to create an awesome place to work. And that stemmed from this conversation Ryan and I had when we first started the company. We were like, let's try and build the last company we would ever want to work for. I'm like, I don't know whether or not that'll be true, but we should do that. Like, why not build the last place like that? And the way you do that is you start talking to your employees. So anyway, like fast forward 6-7 years, and I just realized like, man, these people are like, I love this. Like, there's a story of this engineer, and we do like coaching. So I do this one-on-one coaching with him every month. And one of the cool things about that is like, when someone's going to leave. So he started to have the conversation. He's like, I really think I want to start a business. Like, I want to go out on my own. I'm like, awesome, man. Like, let's start to talk about that. So we would have a conversation every month. He sort of set a target out 6 months. And like, throughout that journey, we finally uncovered, I'm like, so what's the real motivation for this? And he's like, I want to have a life outside of work. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And I'm like, well, a lot of your time outside of work right now is doing side hustle stuff. Like, you've always done that. We've always allowed it because you're an amazing engineer. I'm like, you do 9-to-5 work better than most anyone. And we love that, and we'll pay you for it. And then you go do side hustle work to make more money, but you don't have to do that.
Right.
And I just started talking to him about the reality. I was like, I'm not trying to scare you, but let me tell you what happens when you become the owner.
Yeah.
Like, the hours don't get better, man. Everyone thinks like, I can set my own schedule and this is going to be awesome. Like, sure, there's more flexibility. There's also more hours, like, and there's more problems, and there's more stress and overhead. And like, it's so interesting. Like, throughout the journey, I realized like, oh, he's like, he wants to get in a band again. He misses his hobbies. Like, he misses everything. They're like, dude, get in a band. Like, what do you like? And so like, it was so awesome. He ended up he's still there at Differential to this day. And like, he's like got really involved in a band. And so I like,
so it was really some lifestyle stuff more than career stuff,
yeah.
right?
And what's really interesting is I realized like, for so many of the people that are sticking around at Differential, I'm like, you create this awesome job. And because of that, like, these folks have come alive in their personal lives. And so you start to realize like, oh man, there's real impact you can have on the world. Like, you want to change the world, quote unquote, as a like driven entrepreneur, create an amazing job, because you'll become better as a husband, as a parent, as a community member. Like, you're more engaged. Like, you're just a better human being. I'm like, you do that for enough people in a community, and that's how you change a community. I'm like, you want to change the world, create amazing jobs. And so I started to really believe that. I'm like, man, I want to do this on a larger scale. And that was a big motivation for wanting to step into Coterie, and why at the beginning we were like, let's take a long view on this. Like, let's not build for exit. So yeah, there wasn't a plan to step out. It just sort of worked out that way, that 6 years in, or whatever the time ended up being, it was like, look, I'm not an insurance guy, and I'm not really a proper head of sales. And I'm running a sales organization that's growing rapidly in a category that I'm learning as we go, and it's working, right? Like, nothing's broken. It's going really well. But I know that there's a ceiling to as far as
it was more a matter of promoting the organization than it was like, about you going elsewhere.
That's right. If you start to think about it as an investor, it's like, I'm on the cap table. Like, I hope my shares are worth a lot of money someday. Like, you probably want someone else in this seat.
Yeah,
like, it's going to go faster,
right?
And so found the person I thought could be my replacement. We hired her, and she worked for me for about 6 months before I went to David. And I'm like, man, I think, we had this kind of mutual conversation. I'm like, I think it's time for her to take over that kind of head of growth role. So gave her my role, and we're like, great, there's so many other opportunities and challenges and problems we can throw you out to go solve. I'm like, awesome. So I start to sink my teeth into some of those, and pretty quickly I'm just like, it just feels like where I'm headed is like this sort of like special projects founder who's going to find some problems to solve and add value for sure. But like,
I feel like you're wandering around a furniture store after it's like, closed.
I don't want to,
do I sit here? Do I sit
where
there?
do I go here? Like, I don't want to be like looking for ways to add value and feeling like maybe I'm just kind of collecting a paycheck and waiting for an exit like that. It just doesn't really.
Meanwhile, you had other vision that you had put on the shelf.
Yeah. What's interesting though, like, that wasn't even on my mind at the time. It really wasn't. It was more about like this feeling of like, man, I don't think I'm using I know I'm not using my God-given talents to the fullest at this stage in this company in this role. And so if that's true, like, maybe it's time for me to step away from day to day here. And, initially David sort of, disagreed. Like, I'd love to have you stick around.
Sure.
Like, but it was an awesome conversation. And, he was very generous in giving me time and space to figure out, like, is it really time to step away? And he's like, well, what would you do? And I'm like, I don't even know. I'd sort of forgot about this long vision I had. And he's like, well, go explore that, spend some time on it. And if it turns out it's time to go, like, I'll support you. Cool. No worries. But, maybe you realize in that journey it's not, and, you'll stick around. And so it was awesome for him to do that. But like, as soon as I started, gave myself, it's like, allow yourself to dream. Like, I let myself dream, and I came right back. Then I'm like, oh man, I forgot about this thing on the shelf, that like this vision for this someday company I wanted to build. And I'm like, yeah, I have to run after that. It's time. That's
great that you had such an open collaboration, both with the team member that you talked about who went into the band, and then with your, co-founders.
That's right.
And it's really just about communication. And I've often been impressed, and part of why I invited you to be on this podcast, because I've often been impressed with the content you put out on social, and being such a loud and clear advocate for healthy, collaborative work environments.
Yes.
And all of that just comes down to communicating,
right,
honestly and openly, right?
Yeah.
Like, if we can just get what's in here out there and just be okay with it, even when it's a little difficult, you can get so much done. Right. So anyway, that's good. It's really
like, open communication leads to trust, right?
True.
And trust leads to this ability to have the hard conversation.
Yeah.
And that's, again, it goes sort of back to communication. But man, if I believe that you want the best for me, you can come at me, right? You can challenge my assumptions. You can challenge my actions. Like, if I truly believe you have the company's best intention and mine, you care about me and like where I'm going, like, it's a lot easier for us to disagree.
Yeah. Your best friends are the ones who have told you you're ugly, right?
That's right. That's exactly right.
They did it, and you accepted it because you first knew that they cared.
Yep.
Right. And I think an old employer I used to work for called it carefrontation or whatever. They tried to put a name on it and encourage it, but it's just being a genuine and kind person. And when you are, and then you also care about competence, and you also care about being great at what you do, that usually comes with some difficult conversations that lead to good things, right? Yeah. That plays well in parenting, that plays well in love, and so many other places in life.
That's exactly right. And one of the things I realize that sort of breaks my heart is like how rare that is. Mm-hmm. Like, why is it a competitive advantage that we care about our people, like actually care about them as humans? Like, that's stupid. That's when you like, I was so shocked, like early on at Differential, when you like do stuff that you would think anyone would do in your position, like, a spouse, like I remember, one of our spouses or one of our employees lost a spouse in that journey. And it was like, there was no questions asked, like, take whatever time and space you need. We, paid her full throughout that entire time. Like, not even it was never even a second thought about, like, of course you would do that. And I was just shocked by like how many people were rocked by just that. It just seemed like an obvious, like, it's just what you should do.
Right. Just being humane.
Yeah.
Treating something exceptionally bad as exceptional. And
yes. And that's an extreme example, but like even a little example of like, you go through an interview process and, we had our interview process in any company I built is like always pretty intense. Like, you're going to talk to a whole bunch of people because we just believe culture is so important, and like, it's really easy to get it wrong. So I remember talking, this has happened a bunch of times where I get on an interview with someone, I'm sort of the last like culture screen, like you've gotten through the functional interviews, and I'm sort of that last check of like, do I believe you're going to, and I always talk about like not culture fit, like culture add. Are you going to add something unique and special to what we're doing here? So I'm sort of doing that. And on many occasions, I've been like blown away by how complimentary the candidates were about the process, because of something like I had to reschedule, and the person who rescheduled like didn't make a big deal about it at all. Like, gave me complete grace. I'm like, well, of course, why wouldn't they? Why is that? And like, well, you'd be shocked. No one, like, just little things like that where it's just like doing the right thing is the weird thing. Like, that's a problem.
My little brother once gave me an analogy about driving, and he compared it to pushing grocery carts around in a crowded store. And if we were to drive the same way that we navigated traffic in a grocery store, we'd all drive with a little less heat under our collar, right? We wouldn't be flipping each other off and yelling and cursing under our breath about a turn signal. We would be saying hi and, being friendly with our neighbors.
Like,
can I reach up to that shelf for you, or whatever else, right? What if we just did that on the road? And that analogy, I think, also applies in business. Like, my neighbor asked to use my air compressor
Yeah.
I'm not going to have contempt for him, or
Right.
he's not going to be surprised if I say sure.
Yeah.
Right? There's nothing impressive about being neighborly with your neighbors who interface with you, but somehow via email or some cold system or whatever, we just get more comfortable being rude and
standoffish
mean, right?
and rude. And yeah. And
what if we just don't, though? What if we're just nice? What if we're just nice on purpose?
Yeah. But I just don't think that should be a competitive advantage. It has been for me and my companies, but it is. And I'm like, that's silly. It shouldn't be.
Yeah. I was curious when you were talking about being kind of the final like culture vet. I think that's wise for a senior leader to be engaged in that way. How did you find over the years building a team and a culture that aspect of your interviewing or your role in that in the interview changed as the culture of your team matured and kind of got aligned?
I think how I approached doing that definitely evolved and changed.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know when we sort of landed on this, but I started to realize like the way to do it really well is actually just to screen on core values. Mm-hmm. It's like I'm a huge believer in like, yes, you should have a mission, and if people know that, that's amazing. It's very rare that most employees can cite a mission. But I actually believe having clear core values that everyone can recite is even more important, because you hire, fire, promote, think about your partners. Like if you make decisions based on core values, like that becomes the heartbeat of your culture. Mm-hmm. So I just started to realize like, man, the way you really do that culture screen is I just started to figure out like there's certain questions I'm going to ask that's going to help me unpack whether or not I believe you're aligned with that core value. And if you're not, it doesn't make you a bad person, but you're probably not going to do well in our organization, right?
That's right.
Like,
you might be a better soccer player than a basketball player. It doesn't mean you're a bad athlete.
Right.
It just means you're not a fit on this team, right?
But I'd rather find that out now, right? And so a couple things with that. Number one, what starts to happen is like if you do a good job with that, you start to talk about it up front and people self-select out.
That's right.
So you get fewer people who get to that point, and that's an issue. Like it becomes a little more transparent. Yeah, and the second is I think you just get really good at figuring out how do I, without directly saying, do you believe in intelligence as a core value? Like, it's not a great question, but I can start to say things like, hey, tell me about the last time you had to learn something new. Like, how did you go about approaching that, right? Or, tell me about a time that you were corrected at work and you, took that advice and changed your mind on it. Like, 'cause to me, that's a sign of intelligence. Like, I'm open to feedback and being challenged and wrong. It's not, you've got the highest SAT scores. That's it's curiosity. It's openness to being wrong. It's like wanting to continue to engage and learn and figure things out. Like, that's sort of what I want to get to. So I think,
what I always go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think we just got better at like asking questions that would help us unpack. Like, do we feel like they're aligned with the core values of this organization?
Yeah, and it's just 3, 4, 5 things, right? It should be a short list, maybe
list.
2 things, right?
Yep.
When it's a short list.
Yep, no more than 5 in my opinion. Like, 5's a lot.
Agreed. A small amount. When it's just a handful of things, it shouldn't be hard to double down, triple down on digging into those things, validating those things, and giving folks an opportunity to self-select. And I really liked your observation there, because I've self-selected before out of a culture that was really well defined, and it was not me.
It's not you,
right? And some organizations, it's going to be, hey, we're super competitive and we work hard. And it's like, okay, so you're working 60 hours a week. You're always going to have the stack rank of everybody.
Right.
Maybe you're a salesy organization. You're firing the bottom 10% or whatever. You can read into these different things or whatever. Okay, that's fine. That's not me. Right. Or we're all about, care and, pay. Okay, you guys are running a social working operation or whatever. That's not me. We're all about innovating. Oh, okay, that makes sense for me, right? Like there are things that are valuable to everybody, but they're not going to drive me all day, right? And so, kudos to you, because I feel like a lot of leaders talk about culture in this vague conceptual sense. So they have great culture, but they fail to define it.
It's hard to pinpoint, right? Like you have to spend time on it. And this term that I've always used, since differential, I think is when we started talking about like, I think you have to overinvest in culture. And what's interesting is like the way you overinvest in culture changes as the organization changes. Like early on, it might be things like, having everyone talk at a Friday wins. Like literally we're going around the table and everyone's going to share something and it's going to be tied to a core value as a way to reinforce it and to celebrate your teammates. And that works amazingly well early on. And like some people might go like, dang, that feels like a lot of time to spend out of your day every week, right? And I'm like, yeah, but it's invaluable. But when you get to 30 people, that doesn't work, right? Like it becomes, you have to figure out like, okay, what's the next level? How are we going to overinvest at this stage? And there's some stuff you can start to sort of identify and learn on your own. But I think the best way to learn what it looks like to overinvest right now is just to ask your people. You have to keep asking that question. And so it's one of the rhythms we had is like, we'd do this coaching, one-on-one coaching monthly with, everyone in the organization should be talking to a coach. And usually it's their leader, but it doesn't have to be. And it's more about sort of you and your career trajectory and like where you're going. But I also see it as like, that's your like canary in the coal mine opportunity to know if something's awry. Like tell me what's not going well right now. If you were to start a competitor tomorrow, like what would you different? Like, would there be a different strategy and go to market? Would you have how would you change the culture to make it better? Like, what are we missing here? And like, you ask that enough, initially you kind of get crickets. People are like, I'm not gonna step on that landmine.
Yeah.
And I go like, well, what about this thing? I think this is kind of dumb what we're doing. Like, and they're like, oh, well, yeah, that we should change how we, right? So you start like leading with some of that.
That's right.
You ask that question time and time again. You actually start to listen.
I do that when I'm interviewing folks. We talk about strengths, weaknesses, and you ask somebody, oh, tell me what your weakness is. What are they going to say? Oh, I work too hard.
Right.
Or some canned nonsense like that. That's right. But if you say, like I've done sales before and I was always really bad at documenting sales activity. I hate doing administrative tasks.
Right.
I'm never going to build a career out of that. And I'm going to do everything I can to avoid the responsibility for doing a lot of documentation. Note that, LinkedIn. I don't want that job.
That's not me.
Right.
Don't say those
But
to
when
me.
you can do that for yourself in the conversation with somebody and be vulnerable yourself,
that's right.
then they're welcome to.
Yep.
Right?
You're exactly right.
So that's a good call.
Yeah. So it's a really fun way though to identify how can we make this place better. And then the key is like you can't listen to all of it, but if you listen to none of it, people are going to shut down. They'll stop sharing. And that's on the culture side. That's on that can be on anything in the organization. And I think a really important thing is like circling back. So I don't love taking amazing notes in a meeting like that, but it's really important actually, because if I can come back to you and say like, hey, remember that conversation we had? Like I had a chat with our CEO and here's why I don't think it's actually going to work for us. Whether or not we do it, you feel heard. You know that I went and explored. I went to bat for you, and I'm like, that's an idea I'm going to explore, right? And so, of course, if you can start to implement some of those things you're hearing, like that's a really clear indication that folks are being heard. But whether or not you do, if you can circle back on that thing, and go like, hey, I know this was bothering you. We can talk about it some more, but here's sort of what I learned as I leaned in a little bit. Like people are like, they're great with that. Like, okay, like I will share more ideas with you now that I know you're actually listening.
That's right. Something's going to be done with it, right?
Yep.
Even if it's not exactly what you want to be done with it.
Yep. I just want to know it doesn't go into a black box that no one looks at.
Yeah, that's cool. I could spend another 3 hours talking about that. Interviewing for culture, interviewing for, that's
your world.
It is. I love it. And I've run a small consulting shop before too. And we put a lot of time and attention into that. So, but I do want to talk a little bit about your current venture.
Yeah,
is it
absolutely?
You want to spend a little time on that?
Let's go.
Yeah. So back to question A, the first one that started.
Yeah. How'd you get there?
What are you building?
Yeah. So as I started to say, and we went down amazing rabbit hole, it's like
that was a good conversation.
It's this like combination of all the things I've done and have an interest in. So there's three primary legs of the stool in Fireroad.
Okay.
The first is small business acquisition. So we believe that as AI can, so I'm sure you believe, like AI is this fundamental, like we're going to see just incredible change in our world because of this technology, in AI that continues to advance. And it's not going to overnight change the whole world and whatever, but like, we might look back on this in 50 years and go like sort of akin to the Industrial Revolution and the .com era. Like this might be that next big, really large fundamental shift. And the place that it seems to me most likely it's going to affect is not the blue collar world. So we're saying like, let's look at categories like home services, like HVAC, electrical, plumbing, like stuff you got to swing a hammer that like AI is not going to fix the pipe in the wall anytime soon.
Right.
But it might actually help me run a better HVAC
Operation.
company.
Right.
And so I look at that category and so our thesis is like, let's look at places where we don't think are going to get disrupted by AI in the next decade, which means they'll probably get more valuable, number one. Highly fragmented, not leveraging technology today, usually run by an amazing technician, but not necessarily a great operator, right? So the ability to step in and add like process and systems. And honestly, it's sort of like all the playbook we've been running in this like high growth venture backed world you can run the same playbook in this category and build an amazing organization. And so we want to build a platform in home services to start, where we're actually buying tech enabling, add process systems, growth mentality, and start to scale in a category that, we think there's a ton of room to grow in and is going to get infinitely more valuable. And so
what's your fitting acquisition?
What is it? Like, what's the target?
Yeah. So what's the profile of a great acquisition for you?
I think it's going to be probably either an HVAC, electrical, or a plumbing company, like one of those, or something similar to that.
Super pervasive demand, just consistent, predictable.
Focused on a homeowner. Like, you're a homeowner, I'm a homeowner. You probably have had the problem of like, it's really hard to find help when I have a problem.
Right.
And it's really hard to find consistent help. And so like, we believe if we can solve one problem for you really well, and this is just, again, it's back to startup thing I've learned is like, build a scalpel, not a Swiss Army knife first, right? Like, let's solve one problem really well. And that problem is like, when you call, you don't answer. When I call, you don't answer the phone. Like, great, we're going to get amazing at customer service. And by the way, we can leverage technology to do a lot of this, right? So we'll buy one of these companies. We'll get really focused on the consumer, right? That user experience. And if we do that well, in talking to a bunch of owners, like who are doing it well, they'll tell you, like, I get calls about plumbing all the time, even though I'm an HVAC company. I'm like, great, guess what? We're going to add plumbing. Like, we're going to be that one-stop shop over time to build an amazing customer experience for the homeowner that goes like, I just know I can trust these guys when I call them. They're going to show up on time. They're going to be professional. They're going to follow up. They're going to be transparent in their pricing. Like, so the bar is relatively low in that category. So that's why we like starting with a platform company like one of those first. And I think there's also, so the second leg of the stool is kind of 0 to 1 venture building. So Ryan and I are serial entrepreneurs. Like, it's what we do. It's how we led, to Astronomer out of Differential. It was like, we started from zero and we built this company and we spun it out. We've done it multiple times now, like directly and through Ocean, this accelerator I've started. So like, venture building is sort of part of my nature now. And I believe like, once we get into this category of home services, we're going to see awesome opportunities to build solutions for our own companies. We're going to build those as vertical SaaS companies. So we'll have this really interesting balance of like, Ryan and I love a barbell strategy. At Differential, the barbell strategy was build a service company that will be the backstop to all the crazy venture stuff we do. Okay. So we returned all the money to our investors from the service company we built, and then Astronomer was this like awesome icing on the cake, like way huge return, but like they had already gotten their money and some return just from that service business. So we're running that same play in Fireroad, but the safe side of the barbell is this like acquisition. Like, it doesn't mean there's no risk in it, but the likelihood of us not being able to buy a cash flowing business and scale it well and return capital was relatively low compared to let's do a 0 to 1 venture bet, right? So that's sort of the safer end of the spectrum. In the middle, we'll do venture building. And then the last leg of the stool is we're going to create an early stage venture fund. So we want to be investors in our own companies we're building in the lab. We also have a partnership with Ocean Accelerator, the program I started a decade ago. We're the unique capital partner. So for every company that gets accepted into Ocean and we're a part of that, that recruiting and vetting and selection process, they get a check from Fireroad to kick off the process. So we have exclusive access, like our own kind of deal flow there, our own deal flow in the lab, and then as two guys who built some of the most successful companies here in startups here in Cincy, like we just get a whole lot of access to entrepreneurs who reach out and go like, hey, can I pick your brain on this? And I've said yes to that meeting for all of my career, and I love doing it. I'm like, it'd be great though if I could also make some money on it. Like, so now we can, be check writers for some of those people we're coming alongside and mentoring. But I love rolling up my sleeves for a company. Like, I want to be the favorite investor that I had, which was like the first call when shit hit the fans because they were an operator. That's why you become a great investor. Like,
yeah, they would solve the problem with you.
Yeah, they're like,
they're
let me tell you what we did.
Template,
right? Like, we're entering COVID. And we sit down with two of our board members who were operators in 2000 and 2008. And they're like, let me tell you what happened for the companies that, like, I don't know what the answer is, but let's talk about like what worked at that time, right? Like who survived and advanced that and what did they do? Like, let's run that same playbook. Like, there's probably some great takeaways from that we can apply. And like, man, I've stepped on an awful lot of landmines now on my journey that I'm not going to tell you how to run your business, but if I can just give you an anecdote, go like, here's the thing I learned. Maybe there's a first principle in there that you might take away and actually, make a good decision on. That's how you become a great investor. And like, we really want Cincinnati to win. Like, we think this is a great town to build startups in, but you need experienced investors. you need people coming alongside them who are going like, man, I'm really going to help you build your business and roll up my sleeves and build with you, not just write a check. And so Ryan and I are very excited to jump into that as well, alongside Christy Johnson, who's leading the fund and stepping out of Ocean. So she was leading the accelerator for the last couple of years. She's stepping out of her post there to be our full-time fund manager. So got this really cool team early on that I know is going to add a ton of value.
That's cool. That is a lot of brain power there.
Yeah.
I like your approach to work as an investor. So I think the attitude, founders sometimes feel like investors are, hey, I'm one of 10 things that could win for you to be successful.
That's right.
So how much do you really care about me versus the other 9?
Right.
You're just making your bets and you're going to win no matter what.
Yeah.
And as opposed to like, I'm really partnered and your success matters to me. Right. And so not being spread across somebody's risk matrix or whatever, but having a little bit of like sleeves rolled up, vested kind of like emotional interest, not just financial interest.
That's right. It comes
like
back
I
to
really
what we
care about
earlier.
you as a person.
That's right. It's exactly
putting
what we
your
said
whole
earlier.
life and career into this and being successful, coming away with a win. So,
and the other part of that is like, I have to build the kind of relationship with you that lets you believe you can bring the shitstorm to me. Because what ends up happening usually, honestly, is
you
like,
get afraid.
Yeah, I'm like, I can't tell you about this problem I'm dealing with because I want you to investigate in my next round and like be nice in our board meeting. I'm like, no, like,
interesting.
I want you to bring it to me because together the likelihood of working through it is significantly better. But that relationship doesn't happen very often. Like, it's more like, I'm going to put on this great song and dance for you in the board meeting and everything's going to look rosy. It doesn't matter how crazy it is in the background. Like, we're just going to have a nice board meeting and it'll be great. Like, that's not what you want. You want to bring the problems to your board and to your investors that like who've been there, who've seen this before and go like, it's okay, man. Every company, like every baby's ugly.
That's right.
Let's just talk about it and maybe we can make it better.
Yeah, that's a great asset if you do have that kind of trust. What's your biggest challenge right now? So as you think about the next year or so with Fireroad and what are you up against? Yeah,
well, I can tell you the biggest objection when I'm pitching this is like, it sounds like you're doing an awful lot. And the answer is correct. Yes, we are. And it's kind of what I've done my whole career, right? Like when I was starting Differential, I was also starting an accelerator and a nonprofit on the side. And like that, I'm not saying that, I'm infallible and I won't make mistakes and it'll be easy. I'm just saying like, it's how I'm wired. I'm a really driven guy who's, kind of got this high motor and ability to balance a whole lot of stuff at once. And the only reason I can do that is because I'm really good at building teams. Like, how do you do it all? You build great teams, right? You pull in a Christy who's going to run the fund. You build trust and you move. That's right. So you give them responsibility and opportunity. So I think the biggest challenge for me is right now, it's just getting out of the starting block. Like we are doing a lot, right? So we've got a fund. We've got to raise a venture fund. I've never raised a venture. I've raised a whole bunch of capital in my life, but I've never raised a venture fund, and I've certainly not done it in this environment, which is kind of a weird place to be raising capital, right? But we got to figure that out. We got to get a venture fund raised, right? We've got to find a great first business to buy. Like those are very different problems to solve, but two problems that I got to immerse myself in at once. And again, you bring great people to the board to help you with that. So I would say like right now it all boils down to capital raising. So we're raising a little bit of money into the top co just to stand things up. And then I got to get that done as quickly as possible so I can focus on raising this fund and buying our first business. So, it's just, I think it's trying to prioritize, like, how do I spend my time right now?
Do enough of this plate before you can move to that
What's great is like, I've got a couple people who are about to jump, but I can't talk about yet, who are going to, it's going to be game changer when they're all in, but they're not all in yet because I got to raise the money first. So that means it's on me right now. Like I've got to spin a whole lot of plates myself personally to survive and advance long enough to bring in these folks who are going to, run circles around me trying to do some of the things I'm doing. You've got a great resume as an investor, or as an entrepreneur, rather. I would imagine investors would look kindly on your effort just because you're you, right? So who's your ideal? Huge advantage. It does help, right? You've done it before. This isn't your first idea. That's right. Same with Rye, right? Yep. He's done it before, and we had that same conversation. So, who's your ideal investor? Who are you looking to? What's your profile of your target audience there? Ideally, it's like the entrepreneur. Like we want more people around us to care about these businesses who've been in that operator seat before. So, there's definitely gonna be some pure financial investors, and that's awesome. They unlock a network I don't. But as many entrepreneurs as we can get around the table to care about the whole thing, the more I can make that call and go like, man, this category better than I do. We spent some time here, right? So ideally it's that entrepreneur who's made some money and they want to be in the investor seat now, but they love spending time with other entrepreneurs still.
Yeah, they've got some brain power, some mentoring, and some care.
That's right.
To invest along with those dollars, just like you building the venture fund.
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. All right, cool. We'll definitely amplify that message a little bit.
Yeah, awesome.
What are your? I guess I'll kind of wrap it up with this question, if you don't mind us drawing to it. But one last thing I want to ask before we draw to a close is, as you're kind of faced with that challenge, raising capital and time to bring these critical folks in who are kind of half committed and almost committed.
Yep.
What's your plan to kind of like to overcome that challenge? How do you see yourself around that corner?
Grit. It's the same thing I look for in entrepreneurs. Like, I know there's a job to be done, and a lot of this stuff in fundraising and it's not fun work. It's follow up.
It's just doing the dirty work.
It's doing the dirty work. Like, you got to roll up your sleeves. You got to be willing to do it. And for me, like,
doing 1,000 podcasts, doing 1,000
speaking. I gotta get out there. Honestly, I gotta say yes. Like, right now, I say yes to everything. So, like, about, I don't know.
I have another event to invite you to.
Good. I'm in.
Okay.
I RSVP. I put it on my calendar. I'm coming.
Okay, cool.
Because it's a new network. It's more people to meet. I'm gonna say yes to that. But I realized, like, I don't know, probably a month ago or so, I'm like, I've been pretty consistent with my workout routine, fortunately, because it keeps me balanced and somewhat in shape. But I realized, like, I've actually gained, like, I'm as heavy as I've ever been. I'm not a very big guy, but I'm like, oh man, I must be really doing good at the gym. And I realized, oh no, you're doing like a breakfast, a lunch, and a happy hour.
That's all the networking.
4 days a week, right? I'm like, oh shoot, it's not muscle. Right? So
like high calorie activity is what it is.
Great, I'm gonna start ordering just coffee.
Yeah,
right. There you go. But I gotta just keep
black
moving,
coffees
right?
and light beers, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. So the how do I overcome it? It's like just the same way I've overcome everything, which is like you just got to put your nose down and work hard and keep going. And my greatest asset is my network. I've got to take advantage of that right now. Like, there are people who, it's why I try and do PR and podcasts. It's like every time you get a story or a thing, like, a dozen people reach out who want to hear a little bit more. I'm like, awesome, great, let's go. I want to tell you, I want to, like, the job of any founder is sales all the time.
True.
You're selling investors, you're selling your first employees, you're selling your first customers. Like, you've just got to be really good at telling a story. And so, like, you have to be excited about the opportunity to do that. And so I just keep leaning in. I go like, great, I've got another person who wants to talk with me. That's amazing. I'm going to lean into that.
Well, I appreciate you being on the show, and we'll be rooting for your success.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Tim.
Yeah.